Moishe Dovid Leibovitz, who is a Rabbinical minister at KOF-K, also doing some consulting with Coach Miami. So we had this list to have Rabbi Leibovitz close up. And please feel free to ask most controversial shver shilas at the end, and Rabbi Leibovitz will answer them amazingly. He had just wrote a sefer, Ashiyatzer. Rabbi Leibovitz has lost his sense of taste and smell for 2.5 years since he got COVID. Now he doesn't have it, I don't think.
No,
you still have it?
No, I don't have it.
You don't have COVID?
No, I have COVID.
He's also the author of Halachically speaking, so these farm are for sale, $20 a piece. Rabbi Leibovitz, please.
Okay, good evening. I want to thank Rabbi Shrek for inviting me to speak to everyone here. As was mentioned, my name is Moishe Dovid Leibovitz. I work for KOF-K and have the ability to come to Florida now once a week per month for a nice number of months coming up, just doing some work for the local kashrut agency. So tonight we're going to talk about a tremendous amount of questions that come up on a regular basis from consumers just like yourself. We're going to talk about things that you probably never heard about before and you never thought about asking, but we're going to cover a lot of ground. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them at the end, preferably when the recorder is off. But we're really going to cover a tremendous amount of material. So we're going to focus on questions that people ask, consumers like yourself. So we're going to talk about topics like bishul akum, marasayim, labeling issues. So let's first start with bishul akum. And it only comes up not only with factories, it comes up in your household as well. So the question is, what is bishul akum? Anybody know what bishul akum is? So bishul akum is basically a non-Jewish person not allowed to cook for you. But the question is, why is a non-Jewish person not allowed to cook for you? So Chazal say there's two reasons. Either because of intermarriage or concern that because food is something which is a popular product, and people say, oh, this tastes good, it's amazing, and we'll get to food later on in the discussion. But it might be something that comes close to you because it's something which people eat and it's a social gathering. How do you make the product? They'll say, okay, great, it comes into intermarriage. It happens to be a Halachically in the footnote says the reason why there's so much intermarriage in America is because of the leniencies that apply to bishul akum. The other reason why bishul akum is not allowed is we're concerned that the non-Jewish person will put in non-kosher into the product. But most of the Rishonim say the reason for bishul akum is because of intermarriage. So if that's the case of intermarriage, how is it possible for you to eat products that are manufactured by the kashrut agencies? Why? Because they have a concept that the non-Jewish person is not allowed to cook for you. But luckily there's two exceptions to bishul akum. One is something which is nechel k'moishu chai, something which is edible raw. If you take an apple and you bite into the apple, you can just eat it as is. So a non-Jewish person is allowed to cook the apple for you because he's not doing anything. You take a urn of water, you can drink the water as is. So if he's going to cook up the bottle of water for you, there's no issue because you can drink water without any cooking being done to it. The other exception is something which is eino oila shulchan alachim. What that means, if you find the product in a smorgasbord or a fancy affair, that means the problem of bishul akum and a non-Jewish person is not allowed to cook it for you. But if it's something which is not fit to be served on a king's table, you don't find it in a smorgasbord, then there's no issue of bishul akum. But the case that I get a lot of times is because I work for the KOF-K and we have chip manufacturers and we have Terra chips. And people have a question about Terra chips is how you have bishul akum on that. There's no person there at the factory lighting the fire. So the reason why it's not a problem is twofold. First of all, potato chips is not something you would invite somebody to your house. You're not going to invite some guest to eat potato chips. It's not a chashuv of food. Now there is a discussion between the Aruch HaShulchan and the Chachmas Adam. The Aruch HaShulchan holds that when the potato came out many years ago, it was like a peasant food, it was a poor people's food. It wasn't something which was chashuv, and he felt it's not fit to be served on the king's table. If that's the case, then any potato product that comes out, you wouldn't have a problem with a non-Jewish person cooking for you. The Chachmas Adam holds it's a more of an important food, it's a chashuv of food, and it is a problem of bishul akum according to the Chachmas Adam. I don't think they're arguing, they're just talking about their time. The Chachmas Adam is talking about it in his time, and the Aruch HaShulchan is talking about it in his time. But practically speaking today, if you take a potato chip, how do you make a potato chip? You take the chip, and you have tankers of potatoes coming in, you have big sealer, big slicers, and you deep fry the potato chip. Now you're not going to find deep fried products on the Shulchan Aruch. You won't find deep fried potato chips on a king's table. So that's why you can go to any product on any shelf and you'll find products that say KOF-K on it or any ashkacha on potato chips, and it won't be an issue of bishul akum because it's not oila Shulchan Aruch. It's not fit to be served on a king's table. Now there is some authorities that say, you're fine, you're right that a potato chip is not something which is fit to be served on a king's table, but what about potatoes in general? If you take a big potato, that's oila Shulchan Aruch, that's fit to be served on a king's table. Or what about sweet potato as well? It's something which is oila Shulchan Aruch. The answer to that is that we don't care on the method that you can prepare the potato chip. The potatoes are not oila Shulchan Aruch, and therefore potato chips is not a problem with bishul akum. Now, if you want to take a baked potato, so that's going to be an issue of bishul akum, but you can't tell me because of that way it's prepared in a way where it's a baked potato, that means that the potato in general is oil shulchan aruch. So that's why the major kashrei agencies hold that there's no issue of bishul akum when it comes to potato chip products. You'll have sometimes they'll say Bishul Yisrael on the bag, and it's a Hamisher brand as they call it. That's because the Hamisher companies don't own any factories. They just go around to large manufacturers and say, make me a few pallets of potato chips, and they have a rabbi there lighting the fires. So once they're lighting the fires, then obviously it's going to be Bishul Yisrael. Then because they're not owning the factory, they rent out certain space for it. Now Bishul Akum doesn't only apply with products, it applies to your house. You can't have a non-Jewish helper cooking something for you in your house either. There's a discussion with different Rishonim, whether it's a Bayis Yehudi and it's a Jewish house and you have a cleaning help, is the issue of Bishul Akum. We paskin you can't have a non-Jewish person cooking for you in your household. There are leniencies that apply. If something is already cooked, then there's no Bishul Akum by Bishul Akum, even though there is by Shabbos in certain situations, but by Bishul Akum rather, there's no Bishul Akum Bishul. So therefore, you can have something from a freezer and take it out, and a non-Jewish person could cook for you. Also, there's a machlekes between a place about microwave ovens. If you can have a non-Jewish cleaning lady put something in a microwave oven for you, even though Hilchos Shabbos is a discussion whether a microwave is considered cooking or not between Shalom Zalman and Rabbi Moishe, but in regards to kashrus and Bishul Akum, there are many authorities that still hold that there's going to be Bishul Akum with a microwave. Even though there are leniencies, it's definitely being machmer that a non-Jewish person should not put something in the microwave to cook. Most of the times, product in the microwave oven is not there to cook, it's there to re-warm things, and in that case, it won't be an issue of Bishul Akum. Going on to the next topic, which comes up many times, and that is Maris Ayin. Can you go into a rest stop and buy a coffee at a rest stop on the 95, or I personally drive 40,000 miles a year, and I'm constantly driving, whether it's to Rhode Island and Connecticut and different states, and I pass a lot of the rest stops. And can I go, or anybody can go, and they're traveling, could buy a coffee. So the topic of Maris Ayin is spoken about in Shulchan Aruch and Yoreh De'ah, and there is talking about almonds that are made, obviously, from milk made from almonds, and whether you can actually cook that together with meat. We know you can't cook milk and meat together, but what about making products which have real meat, but it's not real milk? And that's the Shulchan Aruch says, it's KOF-K, it's milk made from almonds. Could you put it together with your meat products? So the Ramah and Mechaber have a discussion whether it's Rabbanan, the Rices, if it's Maris Ayin. Maris Ayin basically means if you're doing something which is permitted, but people will think that perhaps it looks a little bit odd, and I'll learn from your ways. Or maybe they'll say, this Jewish person is doing something which looks odd, and I'm choshed him, then maybe he's actually not really doing what he's supposed to be doing. So it comes up in many different places. Maris Ayin, it comes up in Hilchos Shabbos, it comes up in going in the car after, candle lighting for the woman, and the man goes into the car within 18 minutes, or Moishe Dovid has a whole tshuva about going into a car, and he said that people, even though it's not Maris Ayin, but people thought that he was doing something which is not allowed, so he decided that, once the candles were lit, he didn't go into the car, even though a man doesn't necessarily have to make Hilchos Shabbos with the woman's lighting. But that was in Moishe in regards to Maris Ayin. This Maris Ayin is Hilchos Shabbos about hanging laundry, and it goes really on and on and on. But as far as kashrut is concerned, it's really about cooking meat together with parve milk. And if you go on to any wedding now, if that's the case, if you're a place and you go to a wedding, according to strict halacha, you should have a container on the table that says this is not real milk. This is milk made from almonds. We don't have that nowadays. You can't tell me any wedding that you go to that says parve creamer that's on the table. And Ramah says you have to have KOF-K, you have to have almonds on the table. If you're using almonds that are really not almonds, milk made from almonds, you have to have the almonds on the table. That doesn't exist. Why? That's primarily based on the opinion of the Abi Omer. The Abi Omer is Avad Yosef. He has a whole tshuva about it. He says that because everyone knows nowadays that it exists, margarine and shortening and parve creamers, there's no need to have it on the table. Because it exists nowadays, no one's going to think that you're actually eating a product which is real milk. They're going to know that it's parve. And that's why you don't have to have parve ice cream on the container on the table when you're eating meat. What about going into a rest stop? Maybe it's Maris Ayin. You're going to a place that has a big McDonald's sign and you're walking in there. Based on these tshuvas, it comes out that you don't have to worry about Maris Ayin because everyone knows that it exists, that you can go into a rest stop and buy unflavored coffee because you're going in there for a kosher purpose. You're going in to use the restroom, you're going in to buy an unflavored coffee, and that's why there's no concern of Maris Ayin in that regard, because everyone knows. Now, if you're going into a rest stop and you see a big sign that says McDonald's or any non-kosher establishment, and there's a big window, and you're going to sit next to the window, it's not ideal to do that because people don't see what's necessarily on the table in front of you. But if you're going to buy a coffee, you're going to use the restroom, there's no concern of Maris Ayin. The next question that comes up a lot is going into a place like a 7-Eleven. How many of you have drinking Slurpees in your lifetime? not too many of you. I guess 7-Eleven is not really so common here. It happens to be that I personally have not had a 7-Eleven, a Slurpee in about 15 years. Not because, the kashrus related, but there's a lot of things that I've stopped eating over the last 15 years in kashrus. I lost about 30 pounds since I started working for the KOF-K, just in the nature of what goes on in factories. You'd be surprised at what actually goes on. You'll learn in a few minutes that when I walked out of Pepsi the first time was the last time I drank soda. And once something goes off my list, it doesn't go back on the list. It's just like, it's off and that's it. There's no taiva to go back on it. And later on we'll talk about taiva's achila, how it applies to Hanukkah perhaps, but either way, it goes off the list and it stays off. So I don't miss soda. I won't be able to taste it now anyways because I don't have taste and smell, but even if I would, it's not something which goes back on the list. So 7-Eleven, basically, you have to ask yourself this question, okay? My kids drink 7-Eleven, Slurpees, I have nothing against them doing it, but you have to ask yourself this question. You're going to a store that's completely treif, okay? Why are you allowed to go into the store and buy it? Now, let's just take one thing off the table. When you go into 7-Eleven, you'll see a lot of times you'll have a showcase full of pastries and donuts and things like that. Those are off limits because those, even if you want to say it comes from a kosher factory, it's a loose product in a non-kosher store, you're not allowed to buy that. And I've seen many times Jewish from people that are going into the case and buying it, and they weren't even aware that you're not allowed to buy those pastries coming out of the showcase. But putting the showcase aside, when you're going to buy a Slurpee, you have to ask yourself a question: why am I allowed to buy it? There's 5-6 non-kosher flavors at the 7-Eleven, and maybe perhaps in that container of Slurpee is a non-kosher flavor. So first thing is you have to realize that the flavor you're buying has to be kosher. Either you look at the list that CRC has, or the Star K has, and there's many lists out there that will tell you which flavors are actually kosher certified. But if you don't have that list, there's no way for you to know which flavor is good. Now, in order for there to be an issue of Slurpee at 7-Eleven, you have to realize that perhaps maybe that flavor was non-kosher in the machine. But that's a very far chashash. Why? Because they have, let's say for example, Coke flavor is in the machine, that flavor is in there for many, many months. And they're not going to switch it out on a regular basis. And because it's in there for many, many months, for there to be a chashash, you have to be there when there are non-kosher flavors in the machine and just transferring it over. They usually do that at times when no one's there, and it's really a cold process. There's no heat involved with 7-Eleven. It's a Slurpee, it goes in the machine, and it's there for many, many months. So because of that, and there's no issue of coverage, which means something in the machine for 24 hours, stayed there because it's constantly moving, and they're constantly changing over the same flavor, but they're changing over the bags. And the Rabbanim felt that if you want to be chayshish for some non-kosher flavor in the actual Slurpee, then you should just take it when you're going to buy your Coke flavor, just take a little bit out, because maybe there's something on the bottom that was non-kosher, but it's really far concern. And from the fact that people do buy Slurpees at a 7-Eleven, they realize that most of the time you're not going to be chayshish for that because there's so much kosher flavors that are going in there that the non-kosher flavor is not being left on the bottom. Now, even though they don't necessarily wash it in between flavors, but the amount of volume that goes on in a regular machine is so tremendous that people are lenient with 7-Eleven. I asked Rabelsky Zatzal from Tarvadas, which I had the experience to learn by him for 10 years. I asked him about buying a Slurpee from 7-Eleven. He said, go to the back of the machine and take it out from the machine. I don't think he ever went to a Slurpee. He's probably talking about like a slush where you can technically take it from the machine, you take the slush ice, and then you add the flavor. That's a possibility. But a regular Slurpee, it's not a possibility for you to get it from the back of the machine. Now, once we're talking about drinks, people have a question about Dunkin' Donuts. Okay, so Dunkin' Donuts is very simple and it works much differently than Starbucks. I heard many of you have questions about Starbucks as well. I personally like Dunkin' Donuts better. Starbucks is a little bit too burnt for me, but everyone has their personal preferences. So once you understand how the processes work and how the stores operate, all your questions will be answered. So we certify some Dunkin' Donuts out in New Jersey, and we had a time to really research on how it works. Now, Dunkin' Donuts works differently than Starbucks. Dunkin' Donuts has what we call a 3-compartment sink. Now we're talking about, let's say, a non-kosher Dunkin' Donuts. If you're going to a kosher Dunkin' Donuts and the certification is something which is reputable and you rely on, then you're able to buy anything in that Dunkin' Donuts. Most of the times when the hashgacha is on the Dunkin' Donuts, they're not on the Baskin-Robbins. So that's something to be concerned about because you have to make sure that that ice cream that you're buying from Baskin-Robbins actually has an hashgacha, and the certificates only apply to the Dunkin' Donuts in 9 out of 10 cases. So again, if you're going to Dunkin' Donuts that has an hashgacha, you can buy things there. There's no issue. People have a question that how is it possible for the Rabbi Moishe to even give an hashgacha on Dunkin' Donuts? Why isn't there a mashgiach there? And the answer is because everything in Dunkin' Donuts is already pre-cooked. The potatoes are pre-cooked. The eggs, if you want to, whatever you want to call it, the eggs are also pre-cooked. and there's no bishul akum because everything is pre-cooked. It's all frozen, and they're putting something in now. They're reheating it. We spoke about before. There's no issue of bishul akum when you're reheating something. So that's why there's no issue of bishul akum at the Dunkin' Donuts stores, and that's why the Rabbi Machsher is giving hashkacha on the stores. Now, if you're going to a non-kosher Dunkin' Donuts, some people have said, oh, what's wrong with the donuts? They're just regular mixes from hashkacha, and they're made in the factory. The way Dunkin' Donuts is that they have many different locations, and they get a few owners together, and they say, let's manufacture donuts at the factory. And they own the factory that the donuts are being manufactured in, or they'll hire an outside company to make the donuts for them. I personally go to a Dunkin' Donuts manufacturer in upstate New York, and they service about 400 different Dunkin' Donuts stores. And they have a lot of ingredients there, and they manufacture the donuts, and they cook it, and there's hashkacha on the factory, because they're servicing many stores. And that's why they're able to eat at those stores, because of the fact that they're being serviced by a kosher Dunkin' Donuts. But again, there's a very unique idea is that it's just be hashkacha on the entire store. To give an hashkacha on a few things and not an entire store is also very limited in what you actually can give hashkacha onto. So if you're giving a hashkacha on a Dunkin' Donuts, you're not only giving on the store, you're also giving on the factory, because that's where the donuts are actually coming from. But when you have a non-kosher store, you cannot have any donuts from the store, because even though you say they're being supplied by one of the suppliers, you have no way of verifying it if there's no rabbi going into the store. So you could buy just regular coffee. If you have flavors, you have to check the flavors to make sure they're certified. Most of the times the Dunkin' Donuts flavors will be certified. They don't have a variety of flavors at Dunkin' Donuts. They have one kind of bean, and they grind it there, and then if you want a hazelnut, they'll just put a pump into the drink, and that's your hazelnut coffee. So they don't have any actual flavored beans in the store, just too much volume to it. So when you go into a Dunkin' Donuts and you want to buy hazelnut coffee, you have to check the hazelnut spray to make sure that it's certified. If it's unflavored coffee, you can buy it, because again, they're not doing anything to the actual equipment. And the reason why you can buy it, and it's not a concern, is because they have a 3-compartment sink, which means that they take the equipment that's non-kosher ingredients on it, and they'll put it in a 3-compartment sink. They'll have a rinse, they'll have a sanitation, and they'll have also soap that they're using. And they won't put any of that equipment in the dishwasher, because Dunkin' Donuts doesn't have a dishwasher. So because of that, even if it's a non-kosher Dunkin' Donuts store, they're not mixing any of the non-kosher with the coffee. And that's why the Rabbanim feel that it's permitted to buy coffee at a non-certified Dunkin' Donuts. Now, if you're makbid on KOF-K, which maybe we'll get to a little bit later, you can still buy Dunkin' Donuts coffee, because you can get either they have Chalov Stam, which milk in the United States is considered a category 1, which means you can buy it anywhere as long as it's not flavored. If you're makbid on Chalov Stam, they do have oat milk that you can eat, drink. Sometimes it's from Chabadi, sometimes it's Planet Oat. And if you're makbid on KOF-K, then you just ask them, what's the oat milk being used now? And from time to time, ask them for the hashkacha on different things that you want. If the pumps, if you know that it's a certified hashkacha, and you ask them already. So every few weeks or months, you should try to update, make sure that that mix is still being certified and it's still fine to be purchased. When you're dealing with Starbucks, it's much different, because Starbucks has a dishwasher. Now, there are many Rabbanim that feel that because Starbucks has a dishwasher, and you're putting the equipment that the coffee is being used in together in the same dishwasher as non-kosher sandwiches that are going on there, they feel that anything, even some Rabbanim feel even a regular coffee shouldn't be purchased at Starbucks. Other Rabbanim feel that regular coffee is fine, because the amount of issues that are coming up with the utensils that are used at a regular coffee are much less problem, because it's limited. You're not using as much equipment in a regular coffee. Many people have asked me about a Frappuccino. A Frappuccino, the base itself, it's not just regular coffee, it's actually a base that's being used in the Starbucks, and that's completely treif. So it's not like you're saying that it's a regular coffee and just flavored with something which is not an issue. There's sensitive ingredients in that Frappuccino, and the base itself is not kosher. Now, Starbucks does have the ability to service you when they call it a kiddie Frappuccino, and they have a way of adding sugar and other ingredients to it that it won't be using the non-kosher base. But you should just realize that it's not like you're rationalizing, okay, what could be wrong with the Frappuccino? The actual base is treif. But if you're talking about a cappuccino, there are some rabbis that felt that the cappuccino is using equipment together with non-kosher, and you wouldn't be lenient in your house to be able to use that equipment, and all different leniencies. That's why they're very concerned with that, and they wouldn't allow a regular consumer at a regular Starbucks to buy a cappuccino. If you're dealing with a kiosk where there's no dishwasher, then it's much more broad, because there's no way of the equipment being affected with the non-kosher that they're offering there, because there's no washing that's taking place, and because of that, they're a little bit more lenient. So I would suggest ask your local Rav as far as the comfort level you have with a regular coffee, because there are a bunch that are lenient with it, others are more machmir with the regular coffee. But again, once you get past the regular coffee at a Starbucks that has a dishwasher, it gets much more complicated because of the nature of the washing process that goes on. But our last topic of drinks, yes?
I've seen that even if you're not good at the coffee in Starbucks, the Americano and espresso are better.
Yes, there are different drinks that are available at Starbucks based on the level of equipment that's being used. So if you have like a drip coffee, it might be easier because they're not putting it in the same machine. They also have a machine that they have like a Blondie with a self-contained unit for regular coffee. But once they start using like the machine and start heating up different things with the utensils that are used for non-kosher, that's where you get a little bit more complicated. People have a question about soda. Okay, like we spoke about before, I don't drink soda. My kids drink soda very infrequently. But people say, what could be wrong? It's just like a liquid water with some flavors. Anytime there's flavors in anything, it's a red flag. I used to visit a facility in New York and even in New Jersey, and it was a flavor company. They had 10,000 ingredients in that flavor company. So that means if they had a hazelnut flavor, a raspberry flavor, a cherry flavor, they had so many different ingredients to make it taste like the real thing. Like if you're having a hazelnut coffee, there's no hazelnuts in that flavor. Your coffee would be $10 instead of $1.99, whatever it is. So there's no flavor, there's no real ingredients. It's all flavors. So it says natural flavors. Replace natural flavors with natural chemicals. Okay, because they have made a huge amount of flavors components that make up different things. If you have natural raspberry, I was actually at a company once, and there was a large manufacturer, which I can't get to now, or else I'll be sued. That it sort of had a list of ingredients. It's a natural raspberry flavor, and everyone's like, "Wow, this product is great!" And it had a list of 60 different chemicals that go into there. So when you see a flavor and it says natural flavors, artificial flavors just means it's made in the lab, and natural flavors means it's naturally derived from chemicals, for the most part. That's a red flag because you don't know what's in that product. So when you say cherry flavored product, a cherry flavored candy, it's not just cherries. There's so many rabbanim that have to go into reviewing the ingredients that go into that product. And many times you have a product that's certified kosher, and that same company has many flavors that's not kosher. And the reason why it's not kosher is because that flavor had so many sub-ingredients in it that it was just impossible to make all those flavors kosher certified. So now, if you're getting a soda product and it says natural cherries, all the soda products have to be kosher certified. But what happens when you go into a facility and you're going to traveling and you're used to seeing hashgacha on a soda, but now you don't see hashgacha? For example, Pepsi. If you see Pepsi products, it usually has a KOF-K on it. I'm not talking about other hashgachas because that's a different discussion, but you have a product that says KOF-K, and now you go to an area where there's no hashgacha on a Pepsi, it has a regular K. So a regular K generally is a red flag, another red flag, because K stands for kosher, but who put the K symbol on the product? It depends on who is actually manufacturing the product. If it's manufactured in one of the states that have limited restrictions, then it could be anybody. It could be a manufacturer decides that it's kosher, so it's kosher products and there's nothing to worry about because he himself decided to put it on there. No, obviously if it's a manufacturer putting it on there, it's not going to be accepted because who said that he has the ability to put the K symbol on? The K is not backed up by one of the major kosher agencies. But if you're manufactured in New York and other states, it has to be backed up by the major kosher agencies, and it can even be backed up by any one of the rabbis that have some Hebrew lettering on his name, which don't necessarily mean that you should be eating by that Rabbi Moishe. But then again, it has a regular K symbol on it, and it's being manufactured in a place which has to be backed up by one of the major kosher agencies, or even the weaker kosher agencies. It's not necessarily a heter to just buy any K symbol, because even though K stands for kosher, it's not permitted for you to buy products that have a K symbol on them, because you don't know who the Rabbi Moishe is backing the K symbol. When it comes to soda, if it has a K symbol on it, many times that means that the flavor is actually certified, but the bottling plant is not certified. So that's why you'll find products, sometimes the soda has a hashgacha, sometimes it has a K on it, and the K just means that it's being backed up by the Rabbi Moishe, who's actually has the flavor, but the bottling facility is not under his hashgacha. But generally speaking, a K symbol on a product is not something that you should be purchasing.
But by Pepsi, it's okay, you say?
Yeah, Pepsi, obviously you should always look for the hashgacha on something, but it has a K symbol. That means that the syrup is certified kosher, the factory is not.
And you can drink that.
Yeah, you could drink
No
that
K.
if you drink soda.
With no K? There's no
No,
K.
it has to have a K on
Has
it. And generally it will have a K on it, because it just means that and this only applies to the United States. If you go out of the country, and different countries that have different policies, different ways to deal with flavors and different. I know all the ingredients that go into Pepsi. I don't care about the percentage. People ask about. I don't care about the recipe. I know that this flavor is used and this recipe is used, and we don't have the percentage, but we don't need that. And I also know that all the different places in Pepsi bottling facilities all use the same flavors and ingredients because they all want you to taste Pepsi in New York as you do in Florida. So it's the nature of what happens in reference to soda. Now, many people have a question. Yes?
Just to clarify, that's it. You can buy any Pepsi, or you
No,
have
as
to
long
have that K on it.
As long as it says bottle in the Pepsi Bottling Authority, there's two exceptions. One is Welch's grape juice because the issue is the INS, which we can't get into now, and one is Hawaiian Punch. Hawaiian Punch is made in like more of a juice factory, and if it goes into a oven, which we call a pasteurizer, and if it's not certified factory, we have no idea what's going on in that same utensil, so you wouldn't be able to do that. But if you buy a large thing like in Costco or BJ's, and it's a larger kind of a bottle, then it's permitted because it has different manufacturing policies in relation to that. And many times people have questions about labeling issues. They go into a facility and they see a product that says may contain traces of shellfish. It says may contain milk. And this question comes up on a regular basis, and it's very, very confusing to customers. So let's just talk about labeling issues that come up for a few minutes, and then you'll have all your questions that you ever had on labeling issues answered before you even ask them. So what happens if you go into a facility that manufactures cookies? Okay, you go into a regular facility that makes dairy cookies. So how do you make a dairy cookie? You take a mix, the scratch baking, which means starting from scratch with the ingredients and making things from doesn't really exist, especially in the corporate level and in manufacturing. They use mixes. They'll have a dairy mix with ingredients in there. They'll have some other ancillary ingredients that go into the actual manufacturing process. They'll take the mix and they'll take some other ingredients and they'll put it together into a mixing bowl, and now they'll have their dairy cookies, assuming that there's whey and other things in the ingredients to make a dairy butter. Then they'll have your dairy cookies. You put that dairy product in the oven, that oven takes on dairy, because whatever is heated in the process of cooking, when there's heat involved, then it's going to be considered dairy, because the oven takes on whatever is being manufactured in it. Now what happens in the company says, you know what, we don't want to do dairy anymore. Dairy is very nice, but people are allergic to dairy, so we want to kosherize. So you have to be down for 24 hours, and the line has to be kosherized. The rabbi can come down maybe once, twice, depending on how many times he can come down. The factory has to be cleaned out well enough that the comfort level for the rabbi is there, that he'll be comfortable with making this product now non-dairy. So they have to put the ovens on the highest temperature, burn out all the impurities, and now you'll have your parve product. But in order to do that, the company has to be down for a long time, sometimes 24 hours, sometimes it can be 48 hours if it's not cleaned out well, and sometimes even longer. And companies don't want to be down for long because that means that the equipment's not working and they're not making any money. So the company says, we don't want to kosherize. So if we don't want to kosherize now, what happens is that they'll use the same equipment that they use for those dairy cookies, and now they want to have a non-dairy product. But if it's non-dairy product and they're not kosherizing the equipment, that's what we call dairy equipment. And that means many times you'll see a product that says DE. DE stands for dairy equipment. Two halachas is very important for dairy equipment. One is if you're makpid on waiting 6 hours, some people wait 5 hours, 5.5, which we'll get to. Maybe there is basis for it, maybe it's not, but 6 hours is the mainstream custom. And then you're going to want to have these cookies that say DE. You can have it within 6 hours. If it's Sephardi, you can have it together with it, but Ashkenazim, you can have it either before or after, because there's no dairy in the actual mix. It's just a dairy equipment. It's only an equipment issue, and because there's no dairy in the actual product, you can have it either before or after dairy. Another real halacha that comes up is if you're makpid on Chol Yisrael, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal and many other rabbis felt that you could be lenient and have a DE product, because again, there's no dairy in the actual products and ingredients. Even though your makpid might be on Chol Yisrael, when it comes to DE, there is room to be lenient in reference to that. Now, if you're taking this product and you have a non-kosherization, we didn't kosherize the factory, you'll have a DE product. And most of the times they'll say it may contain traces of dairy. That's nothing to do with halacha. If it says may contain traces of dairy, that means the federal government requires that if it's parts per million of dairy in the factory, you have to list it on the label. But according to halacha, many times women call up and they say, I have this product that says may contain traces of dairy, and I want to put it in my chicken soup. You can go right ahead, because it's bottled millions of times over in halacha. It's not even considered anything in reference to halacha. The reason why it's on there is because the federal government wants you to list it as an allergen statement. So the government has to put it on there, so the company puts it on there because they don't want to get in trouble with the federal government. But again, if it says contain traces, there's no halachic issue with that. Sometimes they'll say may contain traces of shellfish. So people call me up, is that a kosher product, non-kosher product? Of course it's kosher, but the reason why we have to put it on there is because there's traces, and the federal government is very, very makpid and concerned when you're dealing with traces. But also, sometimes they'll say contains wheat and soy. but it doesn't say contains milk. So that's going to be, it might have a dairy symbol on it. Many times, again, that's not real dairy, because if it would be real dairy, companies are very concerned with allergens and will say contains milk or contains dairy ingredients. If it doesn't say it on there, that's the first indication that if something has a symbol that has D on it, that may in fact be dairy equipment. Even though some hashgachas are careful to use the DE symbol, some are not. And there is a national brand of hashgacha out there that has a dairy symbol on products, but they could in fact be DE. And it's not real dairy, but again, they don't want necessarily to use the D symbol for whatever reason. But you have to realize that there is certain things to know, educational purposes to know, that if something says dairy, it may in fact not be dairy based on the ingredients that they're using and based upon the allergens and how to read the actual label on the product.
You can't assume it's DE. If you see no dairy in the ingredients and it doesn't say may contain dairy,
You
assume that's DE?
You can't assume it's DE unless you, but at least you have a idea and knowledge to ask the Rabbinical and the agency. That I don't have any, it doesn't seem like there's any dairy. It could be just an ingredient in there that the consumer may not know it's dairy, but it really in fact dairy, like lactose and different things. There's even non-dairy creamers. That's a big thing, you know. And non-dairy creamers is really dairy according to the Kashrut agency, but according to the federal government, it's not. That's why it's called non-dairy creamy, but according to the Rabbinical, it's still dairy because the ingredient in the product is dairy according to halacha, but not dairy according to the federal government. So that's why they can call it non-dairy, but really, in fact, according to halacha, it still can be considered dairy. We have a lot of more topics to discuss. I just want to move quickly and to discuss a few more things, and then we'll take any questions you may have. So many times people have a question about lettuce and bugs and insects. Now, I'll tell you one thing is that it's more stringent for you to have one insect than it is to have a non-kosher McDonald's sandwich. People a lot of times don't put things in proper perspective. They say, okay, you have insects, what could be wrong with it? The Rabbinical are cleaning it. We're cleaning it well because there's a real surim and prohibitions involved with eating insects. Now, many times you'll have a product that you cleaned out well, and people will call up and say, oh, I still found a bug. The reason you still found the bug is because Chazal say you have to be chayav b'dika. You have to clean the lettuce and the produce in a way where you're bringing it down below a mir hamatzei. Mir hamatzei means, according to the different Tshuvas Svarim, relation not necessarily to insects, but we took it over to apply it to insects as well, is that anytime you have a produce that's a 1 in 10 chance of finding a product that's considered mir hamatzei, and we have to bring it down to below mir hamatzei. We have to bring it down to below 10%. So all the washing process that takes place in the restaurants and in the establishments and the factories that manufacture lettuce and all these different things that they're using into washed lettuce is bringing it down below 10%. You're not going to get it down to 0. But as long as you're bringing it down below 10%, Chazal didn't require you to do anything more. Now, sometimes the washing process will be great and it will be down very, very low, but there is a possibility that you might find a bug in a certain amount of lettuce that you're washing, and that's not necessarily to call out the washing process. Obviously, if you're finding a lot, that means the washing wasn't done properly, but in a general sense, you're bringing it down below 10%. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be washing things the way you're supposed to be washing it, because Chazal say you have to wash it in a way where it's bringing it below a certain percentage that they were geyser, and they felt that doing that would be below mir hamatzei. But it's something which is like, you want to go to a supermarket, for example, you want to buy cut up fruit, you can't buy a cut up fruit if it's going to be strawberries and blackberries and raspberries, because those things have to be cleaned out well, and they're not being cleaned out in the national, non-Jewish world. They're not cleaning it out well. They don't care for the insects. They're just slicing it up and they're serving it to you. So, but if you wanted to buy melons that are cut up and other kinds of produce that don't have issues of the B'dikas Talayim issues, then there's no issue with buying it if it's cut up, because again, there's no strawberry issues. It's just melons. There's no need for it to be checked. They're using the knives that are being used just for the supermarket knives. It's different than a bakery knife, different than a fish knife. So the knives that are being used at the supermarket, in a large supermarket chain, there's no issue with buying cut-up fruit. When you're going to a mom-and-pop store and you're going to buy cut-up fruit, that's a bigger issue because of the fact that they're using that same knife to cut their lunches and different things that are being used that you wouldn't want to know about. So that's why you would not be able to buy it at a mom-and-pop store, but buying it at a large supermarket chain is allowed. Now, what about, a lot of times people want to buy gum, and they want to buy popcorn, and they want to go to a venue of entertainment, and they want to use a hot pretzel stand, and people think, it's permitted. Why is it permitted? Because they think that instead of the 1,450 hashgachas out there, there's another hashgacha, and that is the EEI hashgacha, which doesn't really exist, but everyone eats it. EEI stands for everybody eats it. So everybody eats the chewing gum, everybody eats the popcorn, and the movie, venue, entertainment, the sports game, they go to a hot... The chewing gum needs an hashgacha. I actually go to chewing gum manufacturers. I know exactly how it's manufactured. I haven't had chewing gum in 20 years. It's just not something that I relate to, maybe even more than 20 years. I just don't feel like that. I read in one of my books about chewing gum. My kids eat it, and my family uses it, but like for me, I could do without it. I also haven't tasted sushi either. Just the nature of what my eating habits are. But either way, dealing with chewing gum needs an hashgacha, okay? Because the base is being put into your mouth, and you're swallowing the juices and the flavors that are going in there. And there's many, many flavors that are going into that chewing gum to manufacture it. Even though the base you're not swallowing, even in the Hilchos Brachas, there's one paisik in all the paisikim that say you don't have to make a bracha on gum, we don't pass like him, and you have to make a bracha on chewing gum. Now you'll say, but what about chewing gum? It's just eating a piece of gum. But the thing is, you have the flavor and you're enjoying the flavor. And because you're enjoying the flavor, even though you have hashgacha on many chewing gums, some people will say, but there's one flavor that I really like, and because I really like it, I want to consume it, so it has the flavor that you don't like. So don't eat it. Which we'll get to a question that came up recently as well, and just as you say in eating in general. But if you don't have something which it doesn't have hashgacha on this chewing gum, so you move on and you have a different flavor. It has an hashgacha. If you go to the venue of entertainment and the popcorn is not certified, so you don't have popcorn, or you do what some other people do, and they stick it in their pockets and they bring their snacks with them. There's no need to actually go to rationalize and say, I have to have the popcorn at a sports game, I have to have the hot pretzel at a venue of entertainment or a sports game, wherever you're going, because what's going to be wrong? The hot pretzel could be made in a cage, which is an oven that's being used for non-kosher, and rationalizing yourself to say that it's permitted is not really something ideally, which we try to obviously watch whatever goes into our mouths, and it's not something we should be consuming because of the fact that everybody does it, and what could be wrong with it. Another topic which comes up is mouthwash and toothpaste and Listerine and lip balm. Even though in Florida it's not so applicable to have lip balm, it's very hot outside, you don't need it, but a lot of times people go in for simchas to places which are more cold, and it just comes up a lot. So we'll talk about mouthwash, toothpaste, and lip balm for 2 minutes, and then we'll end this part of the shir and have time for any side of questions. So mouthwash, Listerine, and toothpaste, and lip balm, you'll understand how it's manufactured, and then you'll understand if it needs an hashgacha or not. So how do they make toothpaste? Anybody know? I was actually a toothpaste manufacturer as well, many years ago.
You stop brushing your teeth?
I used toothpaste. Don't worry about it. But I'll tell you a trick with toothpaste I used. Well, toothpaste is made differently than it was. In 2008, until 2008, they took chalk on the board. They used to remember when you were a child or when you were in school, and they had chalk and they crushed it up and to make it really ground it up well. And they put glycerin in it. Glycerin is 50% kosher, 50% not. Depends on what's available on the market. If they have kosher glycerin, they'll use that. If not, they'll use non-kosher. And because it was put into the product below 50%, Rabbi Kamenetsky himself felt that it's not a food item. You're not meant to eat the food. If you're not meant to eat the food, there's no concern for it. Now, in 2008, that changed, and now instead of using calcium carbonate, which they grind up, now they use hydrated silica. Hydrated silica is sand that you find all over Florida. It's common to find it. You take sand and you put it into this mix together with glycerin, but now instead of being below 50%, it's above 50%. And because it's above 50%, Rabbi Kamenetsky's leniency falls off now because the level of non-kosher component in there could be somewhat very, very high. But there are rabbis that hold that food is not mouthwash is not a food. It's not meant to be eaten. It wasn't never meant to be eaten. It's something which we take in our mouth and we spit out. So because of that, rabbis felt you don't have to have hashgacha on toothpaste. It happens to be Belsky that's which I learned by for 10 years, held that anything you take in your mouth, you have to have a hashgacha on it. So toothpaste, I use toothpaste, don't worry about it. But I use Tom's of Maine. Tom's of Maine has an hashgacha under the OU. They have many different flavors. I don't get commission from Tom's of Maine, even though I probably should, for the amount of times that I've really told people to use Tom's of Maine. It has an hashgacha on it. There's many different flavors, and people sometimes would use it if they're comfortable with it. Sometimes they say, Colgate, whatever it is better. It actually is owned by the same company now, and it's the same manufacturer. But either way, there is an hashgacha on it. But again, if you want to hold like those rabbis that felt you don't have to have hashgacha, you have what to rely on when you're in relation to toothpaste. When you're dealing with mouthwash, the mouthwash, again, the mouthwash is not meant to be swallowed, it's meant to be spit out. There is a brown bottle that doesn't have any ingredients in it, that there's any concern with it. Now we're just getting back to toothpaste. There are some toothpastes that don't have glycerin. You just have to check to make sure that if it doesn't have glycerin in it, there is room to be lenient with it, but there also could be some flavors, which we spoke about before, which could be non-kosher. But again, if you hold that it's not a food item, then you don't have to worry about the hashgacha for toothpaste. If you hold that it is a food item and you want to take something in your mouth that has an hashgacha, then you should speak to your local rabbi as far as implementing new policies in your homes. When you're dealing with mouthwash, again, the brown bottle, it tastes disgusting. The reason for it is because it doesn't have any non-kosher ingredients. But glycerin is also used in mouthwash, and the rabbis feel that if you want to have a kosher mouthwash, it's definitely better. And again, Tom's Remain does make a mouthwash, and I use that as well. But there are those who don't use it because they feel that the rabbi's opinion is that it wasn't meant to be eaten, it's not a food item, and it's meant to be spit out. Now, Listerine Pocket Packs is made totally different. I have the ability to go to the Listerine Pocket Pack factory in New Jersey. I do use Listerine Pocket Packs. It's not something which people should be eating on a regular basis, not because of health, but because you make a bracha on it. Do you eat it on a fast day? Is it a food item? We asked the Rabbanim in the KOF-K, like, what do we do with this product? Do you technically make a bracha on a Listerine Pocket Pack? And we tell them it depends. If you're eating it as a mint product, then you should make a bracha. If you're eating it just to give your mouth a nice feel, then you shouldn't make a bracha. It should be like mouthwash. So that has to have hashgacha. It's a food item. It's meant to be eaten and swallowed, and not like mouthwash. And Listerine bombs, the sprays, is made at a different factory. It has to have an hashgacha on the Listerine sprays, and the sprays does not have an hashgacha, and it has to have an hashgacha because you swallow it. It's not like mouthwash or toothpaste. When you're dealing with lip balm, there is a study that they did, I think a number of years ago, maybe 10 years ago, that the women who put lipstick on their lips and then they put it on their product, they consume about 2.5 pounds of that throughout their lifetime. So that means that you're putting non-kosher in your mouth. Okay, the lipstick is a little bit different because it's really not a eichel to begin with, and there's no kosher alternative. But here you have Vaseline that's flavored with strawberries, and it's not real strawberries again. It's 50 chemicals, and you're putting it on your lips, and then going on your bread, and you're swallowing it. So again, you don't have to have every last type of strawberry flavor on your lip balm. You can have regular Vaseline, and 100% petroleum, and you stay away from all these conscious issues, which really brings us to our next question, and then we'll end with this, is that people, many times what they say is that they go to a restaurant and it loses the hashgacha, or they go to a factory and it used to be a nice hashgacha on the bag, and they lose the hashgacha, and it becomes like the talk of the town. They go into a restaurant in certain communities, and now it has a weaker hashgacha. I can't believe it. I can't eat there. Could I eat there? And I was thinking about this recently, and it's part of the book that I wrote on Ashiyatzar, is that I think we've lost the focus of what our purpose in life is. Are we living to eat or eating to live? In a way, is that it overtakes us. In other words, if you go to a restaurant and lose the hashgacha, or it's a weaker hashgacha, so people ask me, can I eat in a certain restaurant? And now it's a weaker hashgacha, and there used to be a better hashgacha. Obviously, if it's lost hashgacha, you can't eat there. But if you think about it, you're arguing over a piece of meat, a piece of chicken. So if a restaurant is not up to par, up to your standards, it shouldn't become a topic of our conversation and just take over our day and talk about it. I can't believe we can't go there anymore. It used to be great. We're talking about a piece of chicken and a piece of meat with some potatoes. So what is that? Is that taking over our life? Is that what we become? We become a chicken and potato talker? That's what we talk about all day? You see all these magazines that the meat of the magazine is dripping out of the paper of the magazine. Where I come from, I talk about this a lot, is that, especially Hanukkah time now, there could be people, and this is beyond me, I haven't had a donut in 15 to 20 years either. So even though Hanukkah's coming up, I don't miss donuts. And I go to Dunkin' Donuts factories, and it's called Stam, but either way, I don't miss donuts. The fact is, you have people that are waiting online for a half hour for a $10 donut, and think about how long it takes you to eat the donut. 25 seconds? A minute? So that's what we become sometimes. We take the food to the next level, that we're willing to wait a half hour to make sure that we have donuts that takes us 30 seconds to eat. Not saying not to eat, but to focus on okay, so you do without the donut. It shouldn't become our thing that it totally overtakes us and engulfs us. Obviously we have to eat, we have to enjoy the world and enjoy Hashem's food that He made people create, but we have to have a different mindset when it comes to food. And having that mindset, it'll lead us into eating the proper food and eating from hashgachas that we're supposed to eat from, and the work that the Rabbi Machshos put into day and night into making sure that you're eating the food. You'll have a different appreciation to it when you're actually eating to live and not living to eat. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me questions. I mean, people have asked me many questions over the years on random topics that you wouldn't believe on, but now is the time to ask.
What about
Yes.
vitamins and medicine?